All right.
Hey, hi, Nath. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm fine, thanks. Just breathing. And I'm excited about the next phase of our performance, of our series for Source Media Network. But I feel that we really have to step back a bit and reflect on how much we've given our heart and our minds for years and months and weeks. And I think it's time to step back again and have a conversation between us about what is it in the public space, the popular marketplace, of presenting, the greatest story never told, which is not just our story, but it's the logos story of the source of evolution itself, running through all of our great scriptures and teachings and wisdom teachings for centuries across the planet. And yet, if you look at all of those great teachings, they all seem to hit a wall, and our own attempts to bring it out in our version, the Logos Code now, which is a major breakthrough for us, there's a kind of deaf ears. It seems to hit deaf ears and deaf eyes, as if people have a blind spot or blind eyes. The normal eyes, a normal vision, normal culture seems to have something in it that allows people, even though we're in deep trouble, obviously, for centuries, especially according to our great teachers who are also wisdom, medical intervention. Wisdom is medical to end the human suffering. So even though it's an urgent matter, a medical urgency, ontological medicine, existential, it seems to not register, not. And it's not something we haven't faced. We have a sense about that, but it's timely to pause a moment between us and try to understand, what does it take to break the trance? There seems to be a trance in the cultural mind across the planet. In no one culture, in the Buddha tradition, in the Socrates to modern philosophy, in the European tradition, in the Krishna and Vedanta to Aurobindo tradition, in the Jesus to the Quakers, and the founding of USA tradition, the USA experiment, the holy experiment. It seems that it's obvious something is wrong, something is not getting through. And in our 1 through 9, putting our hearts into the 1776 now, our unfinished American revolution, the human revolution. For example, the USA political, human, cultural space is increasingly in despair and in a meltdown. And people are seeing that, hey, the holy experiment is not working, right? And it's dangerous. And so from Buddha's attempt to remove the arrow of suffering in the human condition, to upgrade our consciousness to the Buddha, pattern of upgrading our mental processing, and Jesus saying, unless you die, you can't be born again. And Socrates, you got to leave the cave and come into all of these medical insights and warnings of the ages. Something is not getting through. That's clear. We're in trouble. We're in deep existential trouble. Our evolution survival is in question. The cultures are in a meltdown on a planetary way. Humans are missing something. What is it? I mean, I think it's timely for you and I to reflect on that and see, what can we do to help break through the barriers? What are the barriers that are perpetuating this kind of deafness? It's not even a willful neglect. There's that too. There's phobia of listening to the Logos, because it calls us to have to give up what you got, give up your privilege in your own story and your control trip that people have, a natural, so there are phobias and blocks, but there's a deafness and a blindness that's systemic across the planet. And it's showing up in all our cultures, and in our individual lives and our collective lives. So in the American experiment, individuals are in despair existentially in the culture, and watching what we call a democracy and thought we had as a democracy and a free land of the free. It's in crisis because large segments of the population are living in one reality and others in another. And if it's a land of opinion nation, and there is no deeper truth, which is what the great wisdom is calling out. There is a truth, there is a Logos, and you got to get the code. And our attempts to bring out this long emerging but yet missing any clips Logos code, which is new, that we've been doing in our own work for decades now, you and I not. It seems to have the same fate as all of the great teachers. What's up? That's my question to you and for us.
Well, we've talked about this a lot, but, while I'm completely with everything you're saying, I'm also aware that anybody who might be watching this would be long gone with the language of everyone I think about in my life, if they were to sit down and listen to us talking about even just the name that Jesus comes up for a lot of people, gone. Buddha comes up, gone. Socrates comes on, male figures of age-old wisdom, get over it, right? Like it's not relevant to now. Is the prejudice, is the attitude that I used to have as well. And I know that, it's not that reaction is grounded in a space of reason and like being well thought out. People are acting viscerally and emotionally to their lives and everything that they're experiencing, and often our lives, because I remember feeling this way and being in this mindset of just not being able to zoom out from a very, very narrow attention sphere in terms of what matters to us at the end of the day. And I think a lot of it, certainly in affluent cultures such as America, there is a sense of, why do we even need to listen to this? Like, this doesn't interest me. I want to know how many views I got on my last TikTok post. That matters to me. Or even if somebody does care about a bigger, larger issue, racism, global warming, these things, and they're genuinely upset about what issues are coming up, and they want to do something. They don't like that the forests are being, destroyed or whatever. That same person, because I was that person, is not interested in hearing the real answer. Because the real answer asks us to get critical about the way that we're looking at these issues. And that mind, I'm thinking out loud and just sort of really trying to answer that question. Like, what is the resistance? What is the block? Because I used to think it was just a matter of ignorance. And I've also often pronounced that word as ignorance, right? Ignorance almost sounds like, okay, you can't be blamed because you didn't know any better. Ignorance implies a willful ignoring. I think there's no mistake that the word ignorance has the word ignore in it. And the word ignore is a willful thing. And ignoring the voice of truth as humanity has through the ages is deeper than the obvious things that we can talk about historically. Great figures like Martin Luther King being shot as like an obvious, phobia of change and progress towards, the promised land where we are all living in harmony, as he spoke of in his dream, right? We can point to that easily. Anybody can point to that and say, that's bad. But when it comes to each one of us individually facing how we are participating, that's when I think one of the main reasons that it's so hard is because whether people are willing, everybody wants to be the good guy. Everybody wants to feel like the good guy in this world. Even the people that we think, that person's obviously bad, that person, I'm sure, thinks that they're the good guy. Everybody needs to feel that they're on the right side of history, so to speak. And so what that says to me is that everybody's in question about whether or not they're willing to face that they too are participating in the same ignorance that is causing all these problems that we purport to be really upset about. I see it. I'm just going to say it, that a lot of passion and emotional, I want to make a change, and a lot of the marching and a lot of the activism, as noble as it is from a certain perspective, so much of it is fueled by having a scapegoat, having something out there that we can be mad at instead of taking responsibility for how we're contributing. It's easy to get mad at the CO2 emissions and the, big corporate companies, for example, that are, in their greed, not taking the steps to do what's right for the whole ecology of the whole planet, because it's not financially beneficial to them. And that makes us angry. And so we can get upset about them. But how am I contributing to the emissions, so to speak, not just in terms of like my car or what I'm throwing in the trash and not recycling? I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about our taking responsibility at the deepest level for how we are all ignoring something. And I think the word ignoring, I keep coming back to that. Ignoring and ignorance is the most important thing, because I think it's partial phobia, like an unconscious just phobia of facing reality on reality's terms, combined with a genuine ignorance, a lack of education on a global scale, K through 12 and beyond, to give us any kind of basic understanding of how reason works and how sense works, and how we just kind of stumble into it, we fumble into it, we absorb, we get all these software programs programmed into us, and all of the software is malware because we're not understanding what makes it all work. And then we're in this big chaotic shit show of all these opposing opinions. Everybody just has opinions, and anybody you can speak, it's free speech as long as we agree that all you have is your opinion or our opinions, together. And so we've got this big colliding, chaotic mess on the Titanic, and everyone's talking about we've got to get off the Titanic. Maybe not even talking about that, but they recognize that there was water filling up. Something's wrong, and everybody's just taking their own approach. There's no coherence. There's no common understanding. It's all just opinions. Everybody's putting out a separate fire, and it's just this. And when there's a voice that's saying no, there's a common cause. You're on the Titanic. Whatever all the many, many, many problems, it's all the Titanic. But what I'm saying in terms of ignorance is the people, as passionate as they are about putting out the fire in the boiler room or plugging up the hole or bailing out the water on the Titanic, as soon as the real voice says, no, there's a Titanic. The Titanic's the issue. We got to get off the Titanic. That voice never wants to be heard in this analogy that I'm doing. And that's akin to what I feel the role that we've been trying to play is say, what we're doing thus far is not working. It's not working. And we all know it on some deep level, but it's too horrifying to face, because what else is there? All we have is activism. Just got to roll up your sleeves, get your hand in the dirt, do the best you can, and a lot of it is ego driven. A lot of it is self-importance driven. A lot of people's quote unquote noble activities and activism, I'm willing to say, is largely about their egos and wanting to feel good about themselves, doing something good and put themselves up on, again, the same old scale that the Titanic uses about, a better person, lesser person, all these, what I'm saying is that there's a lot of activity. There's even a lot of activity with good intentions, but it's not working. It's all scattered. And when the voice of truth, meaning the voice of reason, higher reason, that has been coming through all of history, through all of our revered teachers and teachings, and what makes science work and anything that makes sense, when it comes to answering to that, that's where what? I didn't hear anything. I don't want to hear anything. What are you talking about? It's all opinion. There's in other words, there is a willful ignoring of a voice that holds all of us equally responsible. And I think that some of that is just, it's not conscious per se, but it is willful. It's a running, it's a plugging of the ears, it's a turning a blind eye. It's just ignoring of the real call. Why? Because I think we can, in our tunnel vision, we see a short run gain. I think there's a lot of just, believing that, and that's what I was saying about the affluent culture. It's like I don't want to say that things have to get worse than they are, but I think that that people still feel that there's wiggle room. I think there's people that still feel that there's wiggle room to procrastinate on listening to what we've been saying. That's what I think.
Okay, there's a lot there, Nathan. In this heart-to-heart between us and the pause along the way, because we're not going to back off from continuing to perform this greatest story never told, because you can't tell it in the old ways of telling and storytelling. It's a primal story that makes stories possible. And any storytelling, that's a logos, and we use the word logos for the fundamental reality.
You just let me interject real quick, because you brought in greatest story never told as though we've said anything about that. The greatest story never told. We didn't even talk about that yet.
No, I know, but I want to respond to the many themes you just opened up, because you suggested this is satanic, and in other words, I was getting to finish that thought. I want to be skeptical between us for a moment. I want to be the skeptic, right? Because you said things like the Titanic, and I'll say, what? What are you talking about, right? There's no iceberg. There's no Titanic. I know we got problems, but it's not a Titanic. That's alarmist, okay? And you say ignorance and ignorance. You're right. Socrates and many other great wisdom teachers said humans are living in ignorance, and don't call it evil. Evil is ignorance. And what is ignorance? It's lack of knowledge. And what is a lack of knowledge? It is, privileging our own stories and not willing to leave that cave of our own worldview and so forth. So ignorance is, even though the story has been told across the planet. What story? The Logos story, the story of reality unfolding, the God story, the Buddha, whatever name you want to use. I don't want to go there right now. We've done that. I'm just trying to get medically with you to try and call out, why is there this ignorance and denial that there is such a problem, that American democracy is in a meltdown, let's say, just to pick on that example. Or that if our great teachers are correct, then we're objectifying each other. And that's a kind of violence, a real violence, existential violence, to objectify humans, persons. Or that we're not really truly free yet, if we're going to be in our self-privileging orientation, which is ignorance, and affirming our will. There was a lot implied in what you said, Nav. And you're right, I don't want to get into continuing to perform with you our version of the greatest story never told, with the Logos code that has opened up and giving us a certain truth force and rational force. You brought up reason, and everyday people will speak about reason. But I'm trying to pick up the skeptic, the deep skepticism of the culture that feeds the ignorance, the willful, I don't hear it, I don't want to hear it. It's a point want. Ignorance is just bliss. I don't get it. It's naive ignorance. I didn't realize it was an option. Okay, that's all right. You say, okay, that may be excusable up to a point, not after 2,500 years. But ignorance is willful, right? And when you bring up things like Titanic, or until the truth comes, you said the truth. Where is the truth? People don't believe or hold, by and large, that there is a grand truth across our worldviews and perspectives. Even though you and I have been suggesting that deeply, that when you really tap the Logos, using the Greek or Logos word for the light of reason itself, the infinite first, the source of all worlds, right? That's the infinite unifying, the unum pluribus, all of these things we used in that great story, right? And we know that, say, in the USA case, the culture is struggling for a more perfect union, a more perfect unum. Why? Because we're fragmented and scattered. But despite the fact that we clearly have trouble, deep trouble, in the sustaining of our democracy and our personal lives, right? The ignorance continues. So I'm just being skeptical now to say that, why should anyone listen to us anyway? Even though what we're alleging is that there is a truth, and it's the light of reason, and the great wisdom teachers and scriptures have been trying to get us to see that, and yet people continue in a kind of blatant disregard. What's up with that? What's causing that? And I think you've been pointing to, well, people are going to hold on to their own opinions. We humans are opinionated. We've got opinions. And different people have everyone's entitled to her opinion. And opinions are your belief. But opinions are not truth. But isn't that the skepticism now? Where's the truth? There's zero truth. That may be one of the roadblocks right? That's perpetuating the kind of what we're seeing is an inherent phobia to the light of reason, or to awakening to the higher self, or whatever language the wisdom talk goes. I'm trying to call out the wisdom talk and not give it away, and not say there is a higher reason. I'm trying to be a temporary skeptic here to try and bring out the medical situations going on in the culture.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, there's a number of things there. I mean, I think that people are really good at pointing at problems, but where we're not as good as seeing that there are symptoms. There's symptoms of a universal suffering that we've normalized. It's like the whole culture is in cahoots, unconsciously driven. Like no one person. It's like when you think of an ant colony, not to compare humans to ants, but there's a very, similar thing here. If you just pick one ant out of that colony, that ant may not be aware of the larger picture that it's serving. It doesn't have the bird's eye view of what take the colony as a whole, and it's a brilliant mind. It's a brain that has this whole intelligence. It's like, and each ant in that perspective is almost like one of the neurons of this larger brain. Well, taking that same model for humans, the humans may not understand the brain that they're participating in. People are so myopic, and they're just focused on their own movements and their me and mine and my world and my income and my bank account and my home and my homies and my whatever. Just and we think that we're doing what we want, but meanwhile we're actually serving this impulse and this force that we don't even understand. And so much, and what I'm saying is that impulse is precisely escapism. It's ignorance, ignoring, meaning turning a blind eye to what is knocking on our door as reality in every one of the dysfunctions, every form of violence, every form of depression, every form of environmental breakdown, every form of all of this are symptoms of something knocking at our door saying, it's not working. And we're really good at going, this is a bad problem. Let me go ahead and put out this fire. I'm putting out the fire. I'm putting out the fire. And so that's the best we've got. We've got this. But when we ask, but wait, I'm on fire. Nobody wants to. That's what I'm saying about the scapegoat gaslight thing that is universal to humans in this normal everyday state of consciousness is it's a relief to have a bad guy out there, and yet a extreme terror to face our own accountability. And when I say accountability, I mean, humans are gifted with reason. Humans have a capacity to, just as I'm demonstrating now, speak, to put sentences together, to think, to make plans, to calculate, to lay out their agendas, to solve all kinds of problems, to create inventions, to have conversations, communications, to dance, to create. We are very, very gifted at using the resource of reason. It comes natural to us. We're natural, but we're terribly arrogant in our being accountable to reason itself. And so I don't care what anybody says on the planet about the skeptic. The skeptic's argument is banking on the validity of reason. They're using reason to make their skepticism about reason and common truth. Just to make that argument, they need to have reason. And so be accountable to that. Don't call it truth, but at least be accountable to what you are depending on to give your argument force. You're depending on a resource that you're using and abusing to, again, keep up the ignorance farce that everyone's participating in numerous ways. I've had it so many times in personal relationships. Is a big place where we start off and we're talking in double brackets and it's so great, it's so great, it's so great. And then it inevitably reaches a point where we have to become accountable of our unconscious but yet willful participation in interpreting reality. And we were counting on, because that's a game changer. If I have to look at how I'm voting on my perspective, then I have to accept that what I'm seeing and what I'm perceiving isn't just stark reality. I have to open up a very scary question. Am I tampering with reality? And I think that is, am I tampering with reason? Am I tampering with this thing that comes so naturally to me, to see, to perceive, to feel, to think, to calculate? All this comes so naturally to me that you know, just like anything else in human nature, when we get things for free, seemingly, we take it for granted. How many people are really grateful for their breath until they've been close to being drowned or suffocated or what, you know what I mean? Why is it that when something is so available, we just write it off as a freebie and then therefore we're no longer accountable to it? We don't think about it. Well, reason is like that. Reason is breath. Reason is more important than the breath. What you call the logos is more important than even the breath to humans. And yet nothing is being more ignored. And I can say this because that's exactly how I was. With all of this, you know, cockiness that I had about, you know, and listening to you and being like, oh, you're just stuck in like an academic stuff, academic language, academic talk, all this kind of stuff. I know where the people are at. I know where people are feeling, you know, we're feeling beings. We don't need to be thinking about all this stuff. Socrates is old news. Let it go. Like all those perspectives, and feeling very confident that I was right, only to get smacked down and humbled in a really beautiful way. But definitely, like when I realized how arrogant that was, it was definitely a bit of a smackdown to my ego, that I thought like, wow, I thought I was the least qualified to be confident about my stance, and yet I was acting the most confident. And that's what I call arrogance or ignorance. I try to play with the word. It's arrogance based on ignorance. You don't know that you don't know what you don't know, and so you can be confident about what you think is certain, but you haven't done your homework, and as we always call it, the homework. So fast forward from that version of me 15, 20 years ago to me now, it's been layer upon layer of getting humble. There's something about getting humble to that resource which makes it possible to even just have the smallest little iota of recognition from one moment to the next. You know, to just be able to take one step in a direction based on like something you want to do or somewhere you want to get would not be possible without that which makes it possible. Coherence, sense, reason, logos, we're all using it all the time. And yet, and I think, I'm willing to say, and I'll wrap up here just to hear your thoughts, I think that there's a lot of deep guilt. I think there's a lot of guilt and shame. I think humans know that we're using reason if we don't think of reason as this like technical like code that is just inert, like you know, formulas on a blackboard. Stop thinking of reason and logic in that light and think of reason as life. Reason is a source. I think that we're using it, abusing it, taking from it, manipulating it, raping it, normalizing it, ignoring it. And our whole culture, that ant colony way, is in cahoots of trying to keep that going. Because if we open up that valve and face that we've been in a gross violation of the source of our consciousness, I think that that's a really, really painful thing to face. And I'm just saying it. I'm just going to come out and say it. I think that people are guilty, ashamed in a way they don't even understand. And we know how to run away from opening up that Pandora's box of accountability well before we even get close to Pandora's box. We can feel it when it's even close. So you and I will post something, we're calling it out left and right, and you have been for decades. I've started in recent years, and we're calling it out left and right. Crickets. Always. Always. Crickets. Used to take it personally until I saw the physics of it. And now I see the physics of it, and it's like, wow, people are repelled from anything that even has a hint of, I can't keep up my farce if I listen to this. It's going to be written off, even if somebody starts to listen to it, let alone, you know, gets a minute or two in, they're going to start to feel that sense of accountability that we're bringing up. Skeptic or not, open-minded or not, it's not up to them or to us. It's that reason the gift of the human capacity to think, which is to be, which is to to be able to even say I or think or see or perceive or experience or feel anything is being funded by this deeper source, and we're ignoring it. And it's not okay. And then put all the layers upon layers upon layers of denial, escapism, and ignorance, and realize how established that is in our culture, then it all makes sense. In my view, that's just what's going on. So I guess a lot of what's brought us to this conversation is as willful as that ignorance is, it's still not more powerful than truth. It's not more powerful than reality. And reality's closing in ways that don't feel so good now, because of our insisting on trying everything under the sun except for getting humble to reason, to source, to truth. And now, the question is it time? Is it time for the trance, the self-imposed, the self-perpetuated trance to be broken now? And I think it is.
Well, the catch-20, beautifully said, Näthan. It's comical that you talk about ants and then you speak of ignore ants. I like that.
I should have got that.
Yeah, no, it struck me. But there's so much in what you're saying. And I'm just trying to, again, not to be skeptical, because I'm not. I'm with you. And you and I are partners in this attempt to help people break that trance. And we're asking, what's behind the trance? Why is it so deep and persistent in the human family across the planet? And what you've been saying and we've been saying is that there's a kind of self-privileging of the way we are as beings at this stage. We privilege in the sense of our perspective. We're always interpreting. We're interpreters of reality. And that means according to my perspective. And that means back to me and how I see it. And using my gifts of reason to judge and interpret, which is a rational gift. But in all that you've said, Nath, part of the skepticism is people would not open up to, for all kinds of reasons, that there is a logos, that there is reason, that reason is a higher gift rather than a commodity that you can take for granted. It's a big deal that's a catch-22 we're facing, or the paradox, or whatever, of ignorance, that if people could see what you and I, for example, see, along with our great teachers, that there is logos, the logos is real. That means, is there something on the ground floor? Let's call it the logos. You could use God talk and Yahweh and Allah and Brahman and Tao and all for the infinite, but it's infinite, right? And once you begin to realize that the infinite's on the ground floor, reality, being, the word, language, thought, reason, all of those, the logos is infinite. And then the science of the infinite shines through for all of these great foundational thinkers, that the infinite is infinitely one. And in being infinitely one, it's infinitely connected, and the source of all, now you got the lights of reason, the logos. It's the source of all possibilities, all worldviews, all perspectives. But if we're living on the ground floor in ignorance, right, because we are immature in rationality, and we're using the resource of reason for our own rationalizing ends, right, for what we want, what I need. This is my vote. That's how I do it. I see it. I'm entitled to my opinion, which is my belief, which is my hacking into reason. So in a way, one of your performances is brilliant, is enough of the hacking. Hacking what? Taking by force without authority, unauthorized, taking and usurping for our ends. Right? If that's what we're doing with the resource of reason, which is going back, if you used to always say God, it's God's presence, is logos. It's the infinite and the source of all infinite names. It's sacred. And people are scared of that. Why? In all that you said, because if we begin to open that door from our own cocoon of where I live from, which is Socrates' cave, we're in the cave, and we don't know it, and we don't want to face it, and we're not willing to face that. Because why? Because there's something amazingly scary to open up to the logos. Whether it's Buddha's version, or Jesus, or Moses, or Muhammad, Socrates, on the history and evolution of European journey to wisdom, which is first science, the source of all reality. We've got to get to that story, right? The logos, there is logos. You can't, because why? Because any local logos that we have couldn't be without the logos. Once you get that, there's a ground floor, the infinite force, the logos, the reason that you call, right? Then you're right. You begin to understand, wow, no wonder we're terrified. because to open up to that is to radically question the stories and codes and culture that we've been living in. It's like a cocoon, and to open up to that is to jeopardize everything you got in terms of your privileged worldview. That's implied in what you're saying.
Yeah, and then not that it's like, oh, we're having a gay old time, but oh, wouldn't you know it, we have the party's over, we've got to put reason first. We're suffering. We're miserable where we are. Just because we've normalized it and have all these different techniques to try and pretend like we're hunky-dory doesn't mean we're pulling it off. The point is, it's the greatest news ever. This is a great thing. God that there's something higher to answer to. Thank God that because left to our own devices, it always turns into a shit show. And I think that everybody does know that. I think the skeptic knows that. And okay, doesn't want to call it the Titanic. Okay, fine, call it what you want, but we're clearly not sustainable. We're going under, we're going down in any number of ways, and anybody can see that in a way now, today, that we couldn't see even 5 years as clearly, or 10 years, 20 years. It's just gotten more and more intense. I for some reason, I woke up with the song this morning in my head. It came out in like 93 when I was a wee 11 years old. And I remember seeing the video, like certain videos that came up on MTV stand out in my mind from my childhood where I remember I was just fixated on the screen. This one was Aerosmith, Living on the Edge. There's something wrong with the world today. I don't know what it is. There's something wrong with our eyes. We're seeing things in a different way, and God knows it ain't his. It sure is no surprise, I think. We're living on the edge. So for whatever reason, that song was going through my head this morning, and I think it's because it's pertinent to this, and that was back in the 90s. You know what I mean? But it's just, there's always been a sense, what that song says to me is that humans do know, we do know that something's terribly wrong. But because the problem seems so big and insurmountable, and the idea of coming to a common unifying solution, a real solution to come to this deeper story that we keep referring to as the greatest story never told, because you can't tell it. It just seems so out of the realm of possibility. So we just keep resorting to, I can't think about it, and back into our denial mechanisms. So I think it's important to remind ourselves of what we're trying to say here. In a way, there's nothing bigger. There's nothing bigger than to suggest what we're suggesting. And yet there's no other option at the same time. And that, I think, is what's so, I do get frustrated. I get frustrated because I see it. I was burying my head in the sand, and now I'm not. And my assumption is that there'd be a lot more other people who would want to take that journey too. In reality, it's been very much not that. It's been very much ignorance on all fronts. And my yoga classes, my music, all these ways that I've tried to bring it through. And I'm past the stage of taking it personally now, and I really did. But now I'm just seeing, it's a really, really profound and scary thing. Because then we're not in control the way that we thought we were. And one of the things that keeps coming out in my offerings and meditations and yoga classes is that we all have a profound, as a matter of necessity, because we're cut off from reason. So we're cut off from the source of reason, and yet we're not completely cut off because we have to tap it and use it in order to rationalize. And everybody is a professional rationalizer. Because why? We got to sleep at night. So we're rationalizing to the hilt as a matter of necessity in order to just live with ourselves in a way. It's like we're enslaved to our own need to rationalize ourselves into being okay. And that is a force of nature, is what I'm trying to say. It's a force of nature, and it's a control trip. And so much of the skepticism is not grounded. It's not grounded in reason. It's grounded in a profound phobia of facing the logos, facing reality, facing source. That's where now, if we link to the greatest, some of the greatest teachings across the globe, you have to die to be born again. Now it makes sense why we would use such a word as die, or die before you die. What's dying? Well, it's really the essence of death, more so than biological death is. Biological death is even secondary to this version of death. This is like death of the control trip, the death of that which is killing us. It's the death of dying. And what I'm saying is it's such a dichotomy, because it's really at the deepest level, it's what we all want more than anything. We all want to be free from this suffering on some deep level, but at the same time, we are profoundly attached to all the methods and ways of coping with that suffering. Anything but the actual answer. Anything but actually getting humble. Anything but. I'll do anything. I'll quit, drinking. I'll go to raw food. I'll meditate every day. I'll do anything. Just don't ask me to get humble to reason. You know what I mean? I mean, because again, it's not that conscious, but it's like, it's that when we're so good at being control freaks in a way that we don't even realize that we're control freaks, because it's so normal that our minds are in a kind of grip of trying to control the narrative. That's a good way of saying it, actually. Every person is trying to control the narrative, whether they realize it or not. And you've got like really nice versions of that, really sweet versions of that. And you've got really awful, oppressive versions of that, but it's the same disease across the board. And so what we're teaching and what we're bringing, what we're saying, which is, again, not inventing this teaching, it's trying to distill it and upgrade it for the modern day understanding, is precisely to turn the light on that. And that's why I think it's met with so much resistance and ignorance. Did that build upon the...
Very much so. Yeah, I mean, it's good to have this moment to step back and release with each other what we're seeing and what it takes. Because what you're saying, again, just to pick up on one strand of it, not, is that look, we know we're in trouble. We can see it. So the metaphor of the Titanic, we don't want to be literal, but the metaphor is a cultural space, a cultural ship, or institution, or nation. Use a case of America. It's clear, just being in the news right now and looking at the issues of voting, issues of racism, and all of the different, many issues, and the infrastructure issues and unemployment and the COVID torment that's been unfolding. It's not just that alone, but the whole thing seems to be in a meltdown, and people are in despair. A nation of opinion, right, which is one of the things you're saying. If all we've got is opinion, and we're all each entitled to our opinion, and that's my vote, is what I choose to see as real and to be together in numbers, because truth becomes opinions work if you're in numbers, not in the source. Mm-hmm. So if we're cut off from the depth of the light of reason, which is the greatest story never told, the Logos story, which is, folks, we have to really face evolution, sustainability, and survival and well-being, because being, which is Logos, is being, and if we're cut off from it, we're going to suffer. And one of the themes we're exploring in this conversation, this heart-to-heart we're having, is what does it take if people know things are not working, right? There's so many disorders in our culture at all levels. Within our individual lives, my own inner psyche, I'm facing a kind of life crisis. I'm not well, I'm not happy. My being is not well. My existence, my ontology, the word ontology is the science of being. My being is ill. Why? Because I'm cut off from being. I don't know that. No, and even though the great teachers are trying to make that link, we're delinked, and in that way unhinged. When we say someone is unhinged, right? They're into separation and shredded. We're shredded. They're in silos. We can have our great teachings and great teachers and scriptures, but they're silos. They're all, and therefore silenced by the siloing, because it's all different opinions. And we can't find any common ground. There's no unum. There's no unum pluribus, unified, out of the many one. There's no unity. And as you point out beautifully, there's deep fear and dread and skepticism, both individually and even culturally. A culture as a whole can be phobic of the Logos, of infinite presence, because what's the Logos? It's not over there. If Logos is the infinite source of the light of being and life and truth, then it's presence. Not present, but presence. And we don't yet have the code, the source code, the Logos code. That's what we're bringing, you and I, right? Based upon all the great wisdom teachings and scriptures, is that, wow, it's been the call to Logos, and we're scared, and we're phobic. Mm-hmm. And we'd rather be lodged in ignorance, arrogant ignorance, as you pointed, which is a kind of narcissism, an existential narcissism. What? I'm first, or we, my homies, right? There could be millions of us holding a certain alleged ideology or story on our terms. And so what I'm picking up from this reflection for a moment, what are the barriers? Why are they there? Why can't we listen to the call of wisdom? Because as you said, it's not bad news. There seems to be a kind of, one of the things we're saying, there seems to be a deep phobia and terror to not give up our control trip, as you beautifully say. But the alternative is to have bliss. That's a good news. The greatest story never told, the Logos story, the call to Logos, the call to yoga, the call to being, the call to Buddha, the call to Christ, all of these, call to Allah, the call to Yahweh, in Moses bringing the law. All of these great calls are really to bring human well-being, mental wellness. Not just mental, because in other words, if we're cut off from that, what you're saying, the light of source, the reason, the light of being, the original word, we're going to be fragmented in pieces and suffering. And you think, what's your alternative medicine that the greatest story never told? Because you can't tell it in the old way. It's manifested in a deeper way. You got to become the story. You've got to become a primary participant in the drama. We are the story unfolding, which is the story of evolution. And it's great news. Why are people terrified, it seems, existentially, to open up and give up privileging our own perspective and opinions and narratives and belief systems, whatever, for what the great teachers have revealed is bliss, nirvana, happiness, flourishing, sustainability, nonviolence, I-thou dialogue, not monologue, but dialogue. It's fantastic to enter the space of awakened and responsibility. Responsible, there's a word responsive, where we're shredding our responsibility to reason. To reason. And that's what we're trying to. So here's my question for us now. Since we are persisting in the many different versions over the last several years, you and I, you in your own way, I in my decades of work as an educator, attempting to open up global reason and global literacy and global education for every human being. What we're saying, the greatest story never told, because the old story blocks it. The storytelling, you can't tell the story in a derivative way. To get to the primary source story, you got to source it. And now we're opening up a deeper access like never before to that Logos code. The greatest breakthrough in our human journey, which is to make it more accessible to the masses, to all people, right? Education for all humans. Everyone needs to be raised in the literacy of Logos, of reason, of who we are. Because it really completely inverts us from a distorted view of who we are. We're not Lego in the Lego place, Lego sapiens, but Logos sapiens. We're children of Logos. And that's well-being. And that's bliss. Why would there be such profound barriers to listening to the call of Logos in all of our great scriptures and teachings? And I know enough, we have many different, that seem to be wisdom teachers out there in the pop culture who are telling us and teaching and having a following, and people are buying it. It's not that everyone's running away, but people also gravitate and buy up, enlightenment books and awakening teachings and life coachings and well-being and so forth. That's also big marketing in the culture, and we have to look at that also. Is that really helping? Are the popular life wisdom teachers and coaches and enlightenment, alleged enlightenment, or all of the narratives that sound true, are they really true? Is that really helping with the medical crisis and emergency we're talking about? To really bring us to cross into the Logos and leave the cocoon,
I think it's harming. It's not only not helping, I think it's harmful. Because it's standing in the light of these big, I mean, it's like you don't just start assuming that role of talking wisdom, yoga, mindfulness, meditation, healing, all these things. It's like they have, to some degree, though I think it's being very quickly, just cheapened to be meaningless. Just another like, novelty or quirky interest, specialty interest, oh yeah, I do my yoga, or whatever, wisdom this and all these different ways that we twist it. It's gotten so cheap, but nonetheless, you don't step into those spaces, especially in my view, if you're not extremely clear. Because, if it's about you, if it's about getting a name for yourself and you're capitalizing on the glimmer of hope that these words offer, in any form of that. But I find something especially appalling about it being in the realms of yoga, wisdom, healing, mindfulness, and there's a lot of that. There's a lot of people standing in that light, absorbing it for themselves, using it to further their, talking the words of wisdom. It's all over, and they don't know what they're doing. And I think it's harmful because there are people who really are. And this is, why I'm so passionate about this is because I was the victim of that in so many ways over the years. When I was younger and just really passionate about wanting to, to be free. I always had a passion of some kind of deep call. Now I understand as the call to the Logos, is a call to wise up, to human up, to get to wake up on this level of deeper reason. But I didn't know that when I was younger. But I still had the same passion, and in that misguided, in that hunger, and in that kind of openness to trusting people who spoke with confidence. I thought if somebody spoke with confidence that they must know what they were talking about. And so I gave myself over to that numerous occasions, and it was not only not helpful, it was harmful. I had to recover from what I put myself through naively. I didn't know any better. And so I guess you could say that's a lot of my passion comes from all the people right now who really would listen to the voice of truth if they had the option. But in lieu of that, there's a lot of people filling that vacuum and hijacking these minds to their own ends. It's not about getting off the Titanic. It's about getting a good run on the Titanic with a spiritual flavor, and it's despicable. I think I'm sorry. I'm going to just say it. I think it's really appalling.
Well, what's totally unacceptable in the pop wisdom culture right now is that it's not addressing the issue that we're talking about. It's deepening it. And what's the issue is that wisdom is not to feed the needs of the people on their terms. If the mark of wisdom of the great teachers and scriptures and enlightenment is to face the privileging of, let's call it the ego-mental self-privileging of your story, me first or we first, cultic ideology, if that's the barrier to well-being and to entering into the Logos or the Om or the Tao or the Yahweh or the Allah or whatever the call, whatever the many great narrative calls for us to face that and upgrade, right? If there's a code that we see clearly, once you begin to see the Logos code, it's a breakthrough of all breakthroughs because it allows us to say, wow, to get to the Logos, you can't use derivative forms of Google information codes to get there. But that's what seems to dominate the human condition. Informationized wisdom, informationized processing of reality, which leads to being cutting off inherently from the source. Mm-hmm. And if we're cut off from the source by our code of our cultures, which is equal opportunity for all humans across the planet, at this stage of our evolution of coding and getting to the reason and encounter of reality on the ground floor, if that's the call of Logos, the greatest story that's unfolding, and it cannot be told in the derivative narrative, Google informationized way. And yet that's where wisdom is being poured into. Our wisdom coaches and teachers are using that code, which is a source of the error of cutting us off. They're violating wisdom and enlightenment and scripture itself. Mm-hmm. Because the essence of scripture and wisdom and enlightenment is to face the code issue. Whether you call it sin, samsara, what is sin? cut off from source. What is samsara? Cut off from Om. So if we're living in a cut off situation, and that level of an adolescent code dominates our situation and generates the kind of phobias we're talking about now. Mm-hmm. The dread, because if we have to give up the dominant code that we're born into and is in our culture institutionalized personally and culturally and in a mass way across the planet, with our different worldviews and religions and scriptures and narratives, boundless narratives that all can come from that informationized technology. If that is the source, the culprit of that arrogance and ignorance and unwillingness to even step back from that, if the essence of wisdom and enlightenment and the call to reason is to face that colonized way of being in the human space and in reason, to use a slasher code that begins to separate things into pieces and our mental spaces and our human relations and objectify each other. If there's a code that's generating those disorders, and that's what the Logos science, the source science reveals, that the code is a source of the widespread disaster in all forms faced in our individual lives and our cultural institutional space. Mm-hmm. And the barrier and the phobias that come from that, right? If wisdom teachers and life coaches are not calling that out, then they're feeding the disorder.
They're feeding it. Exactly. Well, I feel like as we wrap up, I mean, this first offering, I think it feels like a good way to segue into the next, the next offering here is to go precisely into that code issue, because I feel, this session is really about just kind of getting out that this phobia exists, this ignorance, as we keep calling it, this deep thing that has us enslaved to the very thing that is causing our suffering, and yet we're defending it unconsciously. And that is a scary place to be. It's like saying, hey, we can get off the Titanic now. Everybody this way. And everybody's going, nah, we like it here. Yeah, but it's filling up with water. We like it here. That sounds insane. Like, obviously, if a Titanic was really going down, everybody would be rushing to save their lives. But that's how ridiculous this is. Because it's not new. This is an old, drawn out thing. I mean, it's like how much atrocity, how much suffering, how much pain, how much depression, how much unfairness and inequality and destruction and rape, and how much is enough? At what point do we go, no, yeah, it's actually enough now? In the sense of tapping that deeper well in all of us. It says, I'm scared of this. But there's something more important about whether or not I feel like this, or if I feel like facing what you guys are saying, feel like facing a code thing, feel like really asking whether or not I understood what Jesus was saying, or understood what Buddha was saying, or to get over our phobias disguised as well thought out rationalizations, and recognize it, at this point. And I'm just going to say it, at this point, to continue to ignore is to choose the Titanic, is to choose to be complicit in perpetuating all the things you purport to be angry about and all the things you want to change on the planet. It's to participate now. When they say silence is violence, well, the flip of that is to plug your ears is violence. To plug your ears to what we're saying now is a form of saying, I am voting for not getting off of the Titanic. And I just think that needs to be made very clear, because we've done what we're about to do in this next, and I'm sure it's going to go like we've never gone before, precisely because we've just done this journey. If we just go into it again, I think that it would it almost be speaking poorly upon what we've already offered. We've been saying this, we've been teaching it, we've been doing it. It's all there. But I think it needs this today. To me, what today was about is really calling out and blowing the whistle on the ignorance, meaning the willful turning away and blocking it out. And if you're going to do that, but know that you're doing that. And that's where I gracefully hand you the mic to wrap us up with your closing thought, because that's how I see it.
Thanks, Nath. This was a kind of therapeutic moment for us to have this step back and reflect on deep barriers, and to just figure out why is there such an entrenched foreclosure of ignorance and arrogance, of self-privileging in light of the centuries of scriptures and teachings that we allege to revere and follow, and yet something is blocking us as a human family. And the greatest story never told, and it can't be told without the Logos Code. We need the Logos Code to reveal a whole deeper level of storying, which cannot be just informationized. And yet, what are the barriers to that? Even though it's the greatest good news imaginable, to come into a deeper intimacy with the Logos, and with ourselves, and with being, and with flourishing and goodness and rightness, and all that we hold and cherish as the highest, with love. That's the Logos. What's blocking us from all of that? So thank you for willing to Zen improv with me in this conversation, and maybe we will share this with others, you know, as a prelude to calling out, to help people become self-conscious that there may be barriers because we're desourced and colonized by a code we haven't seen, and that our human freedom is at stake, and life and death. It's a matter of life and death. So the greatest story never told is not a nice other fictional narrative, but it is life and death itself. It's survival, it's sustainability, it's our flourishing, it's our mental health, it's our mentation health of how we conduct our minds, you know, which is the heart of reason and truth, and becoming rational beings, which is we are, Logo Sapiens. We're not yet Logo Sapiens. And this is an exciting moment in our human journey. The greatest story never told is our evolutionary drama, that we all have to be primary participants and step in. So let's see where we go next. Thank you, Näthan.
Thank you. No, feels good to just lay it out.
Okay. So we'll sign off for this time, and we'll pick it up later.